I'll just stop there and ask our next speaker. Please join. I should say I know Dr. Rula, I don't want to say the number of years, but back in Berkeley, I was a freshman in Berkeley, and Dr. Rula was my first professor.
I was very young.
Of course.
I just graduated.
1 year earlier, 1 semester earlier.
So hello, it's very nice to be back. I was at the first session 3-4 years ago. I didn't realize how much time has passed. And it's great that I think it's bigger and better, and to see some of the people that we met before. So I really appreciate this opportunity. I want to say that I've, like my colleagues, I thought about what it is that I want to focus on or say today. And I first did an entirely separate presentation sort of talking about all the projects, and as my colleagues would say, full of pretty pictures that we can sort of, celebrate the achievements and what went right and so on. And then I thought a little bit about the theme, and I said, you know what, I'm going to take this as an opportunity to have a dialogue and interactive session. So I'm going to go through and explain a little bit about Stantec, because I think it's important to understand sort of the DNA of Stantec and what we have to offer and what we've done for the region. And my presentation will actually focus mostly on the region. And then I wanted to sort of have a dialogue with everybody in the room about some questions that are really going through my mind right now and I'm concerned about. And I think it's a pivotal moment for designers and developers and planners right now in the region and globally. So just to start off, at Stantec, we always like to say we design with community in mind. And that really is the ethos. Those of you who don't know who Stantec is, we are Canadian-based. We were founded in 1954 through many acquisitions. One of them is MWH, and most of you know me as before I was with Nakhil and with MWH and some other firms. We've been in the region for over 70 years. So we've done some of the very first developments in North Africa and in the Middle East. 3.9 billion revenue and over 900 awards. We're 22,000 employees, which means that we have the best of all the worlds, and we'll talk about all the sectors that we represent. We have over 400 locations on 6 continents, and in the Middle East itself, we have several offices. We have an office in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Riyadh, Dammam, Manama, Doha, and as Dr. Muhammad said, we hope to have hopefully an office soon in Egypt, especially with what's going on recently and what we see as a major growth area. What do we do? What's interesting, coming from different design firms, and I worked extensively in California and San Francisco before I came out here and worked globally in the UK, and then joined the team here in the Middle East, is that as Stantec grew, it acquired a lot of specialty firms, most of them small firms, but more recently large firms. So what's happened is that we truly are an integrated firm. I know a lot of firms say that, but we actually have centers of excellence around the world focused on, for example, oil and gas in Canada. We have the dam resources group, very extensive. They design and build most of the dams in Chicago. We have Australia, the planning group, and another group in California and Canada focused on urban design. And so what this has done for us is that really we have been able to, all of us, create this sort of interconnected vision of what communities can be, and looking at them from the underground all the way up. And I have to say, through my many years of experience, this has helped to add layers of understanding about what makes communities work. And when I say what makes communities work, given the fact that I worked for a major developer, I've worked for clients, I've worked for municipalities, it gives you a very multidisciplinary, sort of view of the world. And you understand that fundamentally, yes, we want to create well-designed communities, we want to create communities that have a great sense of identity and a sense of place, but at the same time, they have to work in terms of commerciality, in terms of giving the returns that the developer needs, in terms of giving a return on investment for the end user or the buyer, and so on. So it's understanding that there's no such thing as housing for housing's sake, even if you're talking about forest communities. Yes, it's shelter, but we have all learned from the experiences of whether it's India or Indonesia or other communities in the informal sector, that even at that level, they see housing and community as something also of an investment, whether it's career development, community, raising children, etc. So there's all these multiple understandings and meanings, and I think that's what we want to bring to the table, and I think that's what's been the major shift in the last decade. And part of that has been bringing together people that used to work in isolation. You had people that did infrastructure, then people who did the housing, people who did the water, the power, etc. And they would talk to each other, if at all, at the very end. And that had two problems. The first problem was that sometimes it would be too late to design more sustainably because they were coming into the games at the end, so you couldn't really design a new type of community. And the second, the biggest problem for the developer and the end user was that you ended up creating communities that, even if they were affordable at the outset, they would be very difficult to manage, to operate. They were very high cost. So it's this type of thinking that led to a more integrated way to design and to develop. So we have a building sector that's focused on several sectors: healthcare, education, science and technology, commercial, civic, industrial buildings, airports, and aviation. Most of these are global, but we also recently started to work on especially healthcare in the region. We have healthcare across, and we have been able to bring sort of a new thinking of healthcare with also that community in mind, that we've recognized that no longer do people go to hospitals as hospitals. They're going there as well with their families, sometimes for the long stay healthcare, and they need to have that sense of community, familiarity in their surroundings, the amenities, much like you would have in a city. We develop infrastructure, and it's interesting because with Stantec, we have community development in two areas. We have it in buildings, which is part of urban design, and community development, and then we have it in the roadways, bridges, transit, and a whole other sector of communities at a larger scale, especially when we do redevelopment. And I'll come back to that in a minute, why we do this. But it's very interesting that we approach community development as sort of a functional community development as well. So in a sense, in the US, they used to think that, when you talk to somebody in the US, especially in Europe, if you said community development, especially in the 90s, 2000 up till about mid-2000, it would be somebody focused on economic development. How would you make cities work? Where were the jobs coming from? How do you put together state and private and public resources together? Community development has since shifted a lot, and we have a much better understanding of how placemaking is really the crux of it. So yes, jobs are important, and infrastructure is important, but what's really important is that people feel that they are in a sense of place, that it has a strong identity, that it has amenities, that it's accessible, and so on. So the whole thinking has shifted, maybe not enough, but has shifted over the last decade. Water. Water is very big right now. As those of you in the region would know that in the last 2-3 years, several ministers, not just one, but ministers of oil have said water is more valuable than oil. And that's, of course, because the Middle East, Egypt included, we're in a very water-scarce region. Climate change is really impacting us significantly. And actually, I would probably venture to say that the developers here would know this probably even more than me, that water right now is a big driver of development. So we used to be able to design developments with lush landscape, right? Because we wanted the first impression to be wonderful. And you come in and as my colleague in the morning said, you design with nature in mind, and people wanted to live there. They wanted to have that living in a city, but living with the environment. Well, 10, 15, 20 years ago, we could. Today, with where we are at in terms of water and scarcity and our inability, really, our demand is skyrocketing, we don't have these resources. water is a big driver, and we have had to shift our strategy towards landscaping, our strategy towards community, transportation, everything related to water. So one of the things that Standec does really, really well, and especially in the region, is that we've been able to come up with really wonderful water solutions that speak about the whole life cycle of water and do integrated water. And we've come up with solutions that say water is not, is no longer, it's not an amenity, it's a necessity. Recycled water is just as important as desalinated water, and we have to treat it as such. And we've worked with municipalities, we've worked with governments, we've created several integrated water solutions, and so on. Energy and resources, we have in the power, oil and gas, mining, water power, and dams. And environmental services, which have increasingly, they haven't been so big in the region. I'm happy to say that over the last decade, this has been changing, and developers are increasingly coming to us to ask for environmental services, not just for the new development, but even for existing development. And I think that is a first in the region. Traditionally, environmental services were considered something that the state requested them to do, but not something that they really wanted to do. And now they're seeing a return on investment, that if they pay attention to environmental resources, that it's part of the unification of their development, it's part of their return for the state, and actually long-term lower costs in maintenance. So this just gives you a sort of an overview of all these services that we provide, and you can see that it's quite extensive. And like we said, we have centers of excellence for most of these. In terms of our specific projects, just to mention a few, to sort of give you an example of the type of scale, and we've worked at very small scales and very large scale. In terms of urban design and master planning, we were part of the Burj Khalifa downtown master planners. And it's funny because Stantec has acquired a number of firms over the last, especially over the last decade, and a lot of these firms work together on some of these developments, and now we're all part of one firm. So it's been very interesting to see how the culture of Stantec is built also on firms that are very like-minded in terms of their approach to community, urban design, and urban development. We did the Dubai South pre-concept as well, those of you that know because of the Expo 2020, that big area is being developed right now. We've done the Sabic in Saudi Arabia. They had a major residential compound. We've done Ain al-Faida for Al Ain, Murjan Island for Ras Al Khaimah. Those of you guys who have been there, it's a big tourist attraction right now and a very successful residential development. In Iraq as well, and of course Dubai Motor City. A lot of you would know that Dubai Motor City was one of the successful projects for the developer, and they actually went on to recreate several of it. And I think we're going to come back to another example of it. But what I wanted to mention on this, on the urban design and the master planning, is that I was talking with my colleague at the table, and I think we heard from our colleagues Benoy and SWA, is that it matters who your client is. So I think when you have a client that has other objectives or that can afford to, to have other objectives in the sense that they are either in partnership with the state, whether it's the Dubai government or else, and that they have an objective of promoting tourism, of attracting residential developers, of creating third-party investment, then it's easier to create that master plan design that serves other purposes rather than just developing a community for end users, because there are multiple economic purposes. So from the development side, I can see that a lot of developers probably right now listening to us say, you guys, you designers and you planners, you give us a lot of pretty pictures. We want to know how much does it cost and what are my margins like. And when I worked for a developer, this was one of the first things we do. We do the market feasibility. It was very, very important. Every one of these developments, market feasibility was the starting point. And I just want to mention this because a lot of people, for example, mention the Burj Khalifa and the downtown area, and they tell you this could never happen in Egypt, right? Because you have to have somebody funding the high level of materials on the landscape and the boulevard, and who would fund the tower, and it doesn't make sense, and so on. It did make financial sense, but you have to actually look at it from multiple perspectives on multiple years. And I think, yes, you're right, the feasibility, the reason the density is what it is that you had to balance density with making a return with that sense of community. But it works. I don't know if it's still working today. I think we have to, there's some questions that we need to be asking, because the density now is increasing almost day by day. And that's something that has to do with sort of the economics of the project and what's going on in the region. So I'm not saying that we need to increase density, but I'm saying that fundamentally, feasibility drives development. And you can make projects feasible and still have a sense of community, a sense of place and identity. It's more challenging, but we can do it. I don't think we have to be careful that us as a community of developers, designers, and planners, that we continue the dialogue so that we don't get into a situation which may be emerging in some areas where density is the question to making it financially feasible. So we have to be slightly cognizant of this. Landscape architecture, I think as evidenced by the two speakers this morning, landscape architecture probably has transformed our cities and our regions and our communities in the last 2 decades. And really it's been sort of the star of urban design and planning. And there's been a new thinking. Before, let's say, landscape was considered as an accessory, as a nice to have, but too costly. Now landscape is a driver. And really when we think of memorable developments, we think of their landscape, we think of their entrances, we think of their nature, we think of the pathways, we think of the landscape. So just a few examples, here, Calgary, where it's more in tune sort of with what my colleague from SLBA was speaking about, bringing nature in, allowing community interaction, really giving a different life to an area, all the way to sort of more rigid, more landscape-themed areas like Motor City in Dubai, which sort of built on the whole theme of what this community was serving and the focus on cars and so on, to something as nice as the Armenian Heritage Park in Boston, which is a very, very popular park in Boston, and really hit the community in terms of being able to speak to the culture and heritage of that community, but in the context of Boston, so that it feels right in with the city. So we can speak about landscape, but I think landscape brings communities to life, and landscape in the larger realm, public realm, really is sort of the visual language that connects. If we talk about urban design as connecting buildings, landscape plays that role as well, and I think we'll see increasingly that is what communities are asking for. In terms of architecture, as I said before, we've done a number of special buildings, especially in healthcare and education in the region. We've built several hospitals and clinics across the region. We brought sort of a new thinking to it. We've done things that are very specific to the region and focus on family as part of the healing process and the health process. We've placed it into context. Of course, there's regional things related to climate that we've also had to adapt. Landscape is always good, but the focus on the architecture, on making sure that at a very hard time that people have access to the right amenities, that it is very not just beautiful but easy to operate. That has been really a driver for a lot of the healthcare projects in the region. Interior design, we've done a number of very interesting interior designs, all from residential compounds in Riyadh and UAE, to hotels, to F&B, to museums. We've just recently also done a project for Abu Dhabi airports. So again, focus on interior design. I think interior design, where it's going right now, is interior design that has to be functional, absolutely, has to be, though, interesting, visually stimulating, and comfortable. And that's where we come from, and using and rethinking how we use materials, and thinking a little bit about sustainability of materials and recycling of materials as well. I won't go too much, but we have a big focus on MEP engineering, especially in the region, because that's a huge, there's a huge demand for it, especially in more complex buildings like healthcare buildings and so on, and airports, and structural engineering, of course. And structural engineering goes all the way from buildings to some of the more landscape-oriented projects we need to do, bridges, and so on. And transportation engineering in the region has been a newer offering that we've had. We're big in engineering in Australia and Canada. We've recently sort of grown our transportation engineering team in the region in response to our clients. We were doing buildings, we were doing communities, and we were working with other partners on transportation engineering, and we decided that transportation right now is a big driver, especially of the changes, what's happening in terms of technology. So we've really done some interesting work right now. We're doing, especially in Dubai, on new codes of practice related to how we integrate the new technologies in transportation and how we create multimodal transportation and thinking to the future. How do you create flexible transportation that meets the needs of today, but start to think that 10 years ahead, I don't have cars. I might not have, parking. I have automated vehicles. I have electric vehicles. So we're working on a number of things related to that, especially in the region because they're at the forefront, but also we've done quite a bit of work in Canada on this. Water and wastewater, I spoke quite a bit about it. I think one of the things that we're very proud of, we've partnered with governments in Dubai, we're doing currently in Abu Dhabi, we've done it in Qatar. We're really helping them create national water strategies. This is absolutely critical. We've been very successful in making sure that we understand how to help them. Water is a driver for most of their investments, most of their development. And the states and the governments are very interested in making sure that they have the right water at the right cost. So we've worked on national strategies with them. We've also worked on major treatment plants. We've worked on conveyance. We are at the forefront of innovative irrigation. We were employing different strategies in Kuwait, UAE, and other countries. So there's a lot going on in the water sector as well. And last but not least is the construction supervision. We help a lot of our clients with construction supervision because historically in this region, even if you have the well-designed, whether it's buildings, architecture, communities, there has been issues with construction supervision and execution. So we've stepped in to make sure that the designs are able to be executed as they should, and that they're able to be then in post-commissioning operating at the effective cost that they should be. So we're a top design firm. I'm not going to go through these depending on what we're looking at. We're from number 1 to number 10 in most of these sectors. We're very proud of that. But we're proud more of all the feedback that we get from our communities, from our clients, that we're doing the right thing. And that's why we have a lot of work with existing clients, that we have been partnered with them for many years, some as, in Dubai, some as 5 decades, because we've really been effective in working with them, understanding their needs and their drivers, as well as understanding the needs of the city as a whole, the leadership, and the end community. So that was my spiel for Stantec and making sure you know what we have to offer. What I wanted to do, and I don't know, I think after the break and the lights are down, how enthusiastic people are. But I wanted to share with you some of my thoughts that are going through my head, because I do think we are going through a critical moment for design and planning. And I don't know that we are asking, some of the questions were asked this morning by my colleagues, and I was glad to hear them. But I want to go a little bit deeper and hear from you. I just had a wonderful discussion at the table, 5 minutes, with my colleague from Egypt, and it was very interesting to see the contrast of where the thinking was. Some of it was very similar, some very different. But I think we're at a critical moment, and I don't think our profession is very aware of it. So if you listen to whether it's Bloomberg, whether it's the architecture, whether it's we pick up the magazines, everybody's talking about technology, right? And we're all talking about smart cities. We're all talking about smart cities. So we all know that we want to create smart cities, we want to create smart communities. And here I have a few examples of what different regions are doing in smart, in terms of smart. So you have smart buildings in Hong Kong, right, next in their science park. You have administration in New Zealand, where they have completely created online connected service for their citizens, public safety. You have connected health. You no longer have to do the traditional route. There's telemedicine, as you all know right now. There's remote curing and so on. There's tourism, arts, libraries, culture, open spaces. There's the new water in Singapore, which has completely transformed the water sector. It's called smart water. The smart grid, of course, and we're doing this in Dubai as well, where you can generate energy and feed it back into the grid. There's land use and environmental management in Singapore. Permitting, licensing is all online. A plug for Abu Dhabi, 10 years they went completely online. They're probably the first in the region that you cannot even submit physical plans if you wanted to. From 10 years ago, you can only submit online. So I think for developers, that's absolutely fantastic, lower cost. They have to give you reviews in the next 10 days and so on. So we know all this, but what does this really mean? We know that it's smart, and we know we're all striving, but have we stopped to think about what does this mean? So I took one example of transportation. Transportation currently, depending on the city, takes up, who knows how much percentage of the city is by roads and bridges, and what do you think, what is the percentage of cities, the percentage of land area that is dedicated to transportation? Does anybody have a clue? Is it 5%, 10, 40, 50, 80? What is it? 20. What's the 20 good number? 60. Do you know, you're right. So it goes anywhere. 20 is a really well-designed community, a very effective community. It goes up to 60% and even higher. So imagine that dedication of land area to transportation. And yet, we are saying today, we all said the same thing, my colleagues and I, that transportation is fundamentally changing. So just to go through some things. So that means, think of it from a developer. You're going to have more land to do more productive things with it, right? And from an urban designer and a planner, we're going to be able to dedicate more to community development and to things that people want. People don't want more roads. They want the convenience, but they don't want more roads. So just to go through a couple of things. So transit. Transit used to take up a lot of space, but of course it moved lots of people very fast. We're still going to have transit, but what's happening? We now have a lot of mixed-use development, right? We saw Hanoi, and they are world leaders in that. We do mixed-use development. Everybody's doing mixed-use development. So in theory, we should require less, right? There should be less trip generation because you're not going out as much. You have your entertainment, you have your housing, you have your amenities, your healthcare. So that is transforming the nature of transit. You have multimodal. You're now designing things so that you can walk, you can cycle, you don't need the car. And that's even in a hot climate like Dubai, that's happening. It still goes, I have tons of pictures I can share with you, but people are actually, in the midst of the summer, 50 degrees on cycles. And then you have the Hyperloop that is coming by next year, the next year or two, which is going to also transform our transportation and move quickly. And last but not least, we're going to have the pods. And just to tell you a side thing, so that you don't think that this is all science fiction. You know, the pods, which are just sort of units that people are designing now that can take you anywhere. They'll pick you up and they'll be on tracks like a train, and then they can take you anywhere. It sounds a little bit out of this world, a little bit, this is Mars. Do you know that in 2004, at the Sharjah Urban Planning Symposium, a Latin American duo presented this idea. And they had done the feasibility, they had done the design, they've done the urban design, and it was pods that would go all the way into the buildings and deliver people, deliver goods, and it worked on tracks, and they had done the feasibility, and nobody took them that seriously. They presented to lots of, I won't say who, and even me, to be honest, I liked the idea, but I kept saying, is it feasible, is it feasible? Well, we're here today. Transit is going to be transformed by these pods. Walking. Can walking change? Well, if you lived in our communities in Dubai, You'll see people walking, definitely, jogging, yes, but you'll also people everywhere on hoverboards, right? So instead of walking, they're on hoverboards. They're on the personal transport, the BTs. They're on scooters. They're on, shared works as well. And what's changing about that is that it's become so prevalent that Dubai just recently announced, hey, stop, put a stop to scooters because we have to think this is a mode of transport now. And we have to put regulations in place for safety. So what are we doing as urban planners and designers to change the way we think of a sidewalk? Because the sidewalk is no longer just for walking, right? So that's something to think about. Cycling. Motorized cycling has hit the region as it has globally, right? And sharing. We now share bicycles. We see it all over. I don't know if it's big in Egypt, but definitely it's big in the region, and it's starting to grow, especially at tourist sites or multi-use, multi-purpose areas. But what about the future? We used to make fun that there's no such thing as flying car. I put A, B. There might be very soon automated bicycles, right? That's not so far-fetched. Think about it. People like the experience of bicycles, but some of us don't know. Some of us are challenged. There's automated bicycles. There's also the flying bicycles that I am positive, I don't know who, but somewhere in California, somebody's working on it, right? How is that going to create a different layer of the city? We have the underground and we have the surface, and increasingly, because of the drones, because of this, we're going to have another layer. The roads or the pathways are going to move one up into the air. Driving and parking, I don't want to say too much because we all know what's happening. In Dubai, we're going to release the first flying drones, like the transport taxis, in the next month or two, and we've already helped them write the codes to allow them to have, we call them the flying taxis. So they're just about, they've already tested it, they've done the pilot test, and they're going to do that. We have the Emirates Identity Authority that delivers their IDs through drones. So you now have to design, as designers, areas where drones can land, right? You have to design where the drones can land, whether they're dropping off people or dropping off medicines or dropping off cars or taking photographs. What does this mean? We're creating a different layer above the city. We haven't thought about it sufficiently yet. And of course, there's the IoT, right? The sensors everywhere, right? There's last I heard, sort of 1 billion sensors. I don't know if it's every month that's added. It's something ridiculous, right? We don't need parking anymore because your car stays in motion, basically. If it's automated and it drops you off and it can stay in motion, it doesn't need to park, it goes on to the next trip. Your sensors are allowing everybody to talk to each other, to know where you are, what you need, to anticipate your needs. And this is really happening. This is not far-fetched. This is happening in North America, this is happening in Europe. And we are testing it as well in the UAE. Goods movement. Most people don't think about goods movement, but increasingly, two things I would just mention from these, two things are going to change the way we think about goods movement. One is that you do have drones, right? And everybody's talking about the fact that you will be able to deliver time-sensitive things with drones. So that is transforming the whole mobility of cargo movement and transporting goods delivery. But even more important is 3D printing. Think about what 3D printing is doing. Right now, there are people that can receive the design of your shoe, and you can print your shoe at home. You can print your Nike at home. I can't remember the name. There's a CEO, a female CEO of a major firm, and when she went to Davos last year, she was wearing printed shoes. She didn't have to wait to go shop for them. I went to a recent exhibit for the World Energy, and you know the big thing that everybody's working on right now is 3D food printing. You don't need a personal chef anymore. You just, with the recipes, I actually saw it happening, and I'm going to be the first one to buy it. It will really make my life comfortable, but you have 3D printing. So jewelry is being printed. I can go on and on. A lot of the, what they call additive printing, 3D printing, it's happening in the manufacturing sector, everywhere. Every industry is looking at it. What does this mean? It changes. Do you need as many plants? What do you need in your house? Do you need a separate room in your house? What do you need? Where are the materials? It changes everything. It's changing, for example, the nature of warehousing and storage, because actually we need more warehousing and logistics near our communities than we did before. And last but not least, even emergency services. Everything that's going on in telemedicine and healthcare is changing how many times you visit a medical center or hospital and for what. So I didn't want to go too much into this, but I want to say that we are at an important juncture. And I think just like right now, the lawyers are debating whether they can replace the junior lawyers, and journalists are saying that they are already using automated intelligence or artificial intelligence to write their articles. We as urban designers and planners, and even developers, need to start checking ourselves. What is it? How are we using the new technologies? And are we really thinking about what needs to happen to anticipate what's coming into the communities? I think we really need to do this. I think looking at the sidewalk, looking at the parking situation, looking at our roads, looking at what we dedicate new space to, that really needs to be thought differently. Before I go on, I don't know if is there any comments or any thoughts that somebody would like to share? No. Okay. One question I wanted to ask is, are we increasing choice or decreasing choice? So I just took a quote from a newspaper recently, The National. And those of you who live in Dubai, we feel like, yes, we have some really interesting projects. We have La Mer, we have City Walk, we have the beach, we have Jumeirah Point, and the list goes on. We have El Sif, we have Marina. But it's starting to feel a little bit like we're losing some choice. And this one journalist said, it feels like a combination. So she went to Blue Waters, which is the latest development, an island off of the beach. And she said, it feels like a combination of the beach, City Walk, and La Mer. But then you find yourself at the base of Ain Dubai, and you realize you're somewhere that has come to dominate entirely different. So, are we increasing choice? I think my worry is that when you develop too quickly, too fast, and when we have these formulas for success, they might be absolutely beautiful, absolutely usable and serving. But there's a real question that we just need to think about, because are we allowing the time for layers to build up in the city? Are we going so fast that we are replicating? And I don't know the answer to this. I just posed this question because I think it's something that developers in particular need to think about. I don't know if this is true or not, but a lot of designers and planners, we like to lay blame at developers. We like to say that we're only as good as our client, right? We can't design unique and different things if the client doesn't want to push, doesn't want to fund it. So we try to convince you, we try to explain, and sometimes we're successful and sometimes we're not. But I think developers, especially in this very economically tight climate and this transition to a new era of technology-driven, we're not sure exactly what the future holds for us. We see the tools, we see what's happening, but we're really not sure what is our community going to look like in the 21st century, not the 21st, in 100 years. If you push it that far, we know in 10 years what's going to happen in terms of vehicles. But we don't know what's going beyond that. We really haven't taken the time to imagine that community. Developers are competing on the same ground. They're all doing the same type, I think, in general. We're trying to do unique. And we heard some examples today where we try to add some unique elements. We try to do some branding. But still, in general, it's starting to feel like we have discovered certain successful formulas related to mixed use. And it may be that we are replicating or that they're too close. And so we might be narrowing the choice for end users and for investors. So developers, I think, have a major role, as well as designers and planners, that we take the time to rethink how we can create more differentiation, how we can think about communities. And I always pose this question because people always tell me, Rula, we're reacting to the needs of lifestyle. right? It's because this is the new lifestyle. And you have to wonder sometimes, are we reacting to the lifestyle, or because we're creating these spaces that everybody's lifestyle is also shifting? So I think there's a two-way street here that we want to think about. Another thing about the city, as we just mentioned, of all, everything that is so connected, from your home to your transport, all this is connected. Your banking system, we know, some of us are feeling a little bit claustrophobic about how everybody knows every movement you make. But my question is, how much space will we need? We heard that retail is disappearing, a lot of retail. In Dubai, we're building more, but that doesn't mean that we're building more, that it won't be less in the future. And yes, it can be different, but how much space, what type of space do we need? Are we asking these questions? That's something that we should be working side by side with developers to ask. So, in terms of location, we always say that real estate, the success factor for real estate is location, location, location. I don't know if anybody shares this with me, but I've started to feel in Dubai that location is not as critical, because there are so many locations right now that offer very similar products, that you have these amenities. So it might not be location, location anymore. It's now about the quality and the performance and the cost and so on and so forth. Office is no longer, conventional office space has changed. We might need less of it. We know that in the US and in Europe, more people are working increasingly. In San Francisco, 2/3, I think it's something like this, 2/3 of people are actually contract workers. Do you know that? 2/3, San Francisco is the first city in the US that 2/3 of people don't work for a company. They work out of cafes, at home, offices. What does that mean for the office space that we need? So we have to think about this. Entertainment, we need more space for entertainment and leisure. People have more time. Yes, they work harder, but they also have more time for play. They want multiplicity of play. What are we doing in terms of creating more spaces? And I won't go too much into detail, but if there's a question and answer, I can delve a little bit deeper into this. So circulation, I mentioned, we really have to think about the 3 tiers. We have already research underway by major, let's say, investors or points of interest about how you create underground circulation. We have the air that's providing another alternative. We have surface. Amenities, I'm not going to go too much into it, but you can quote me. I think in the next 10 years, there'll be less schools. If those of you who have children, and I have, do you know that they go to school not anymore to learn from the teacher? They're expected to do their lesson at home, and they go to interact with their colleagues on their computer. The teacher doesn't explain anything anymore. That's the new learning, right? They have to watch YouTube videos of the teacher or some colleague, and then they go to interact with their colleagues and discuss it. So I started thinking, so when I learned about this from my school, my first thought was like, why am I paying so much money? I'd rather them, stay at home and talk to me. But then I thought about it. If that's all they're doing, they're learning from YouTube and colleagues, and then going to discuss, what do we need schools for? Can schools not be combined with our sports centers, since a big part of schools are the multi-purpose? Can they be combined with the cafes that the students learn better at? Can they be combined with other types of uses that are during the day are not used very much, and then in the evening people go to them? So you start to think differently, and I guess I'm just putting a challenge out there to all of us, is that we don't need to wait for somebody in California to rethink this new school model. We can do it in the region, and I'm very proud that this region, Egypt included, UAE, others are moving ahead with things that are firsts in the region. So I'm sure you already heard that we have the first smart police station in Dubai. They were surprised. Nobody thought about, what does a smart police station do? It is just a small unit. You get to interact with somebody over a screen. You can exchange. There's no people there. There might be a robot, but it's a lot of interaction. And they found, surprisingly, people went there more often than they would to a police station, because people are uncomfortable entering police stations. So this small kiosk at this police station serves the purpose of a big station. What does that do for our communities? In fact, you're getting more interaction. So amenities are changing, schools are changing, public realm needs to be more diverse. There's a huge opportunity for landscape architects and urban designers. That is going to be a big driver. They're going to be more interactive, more space for sports and recreation and diversity, not your typical sports and recreation. Place branding is going to be increasingly important. And we saw in the projects that SWA and Binoy about branding, it's very important. I had a friend visit me from Canada 2 days ago. He came to Dubai. And as he was leaving, he says to me, Rula, I just want to make one comment. I mean, yes, Dubai, beautiful, great, Abu Dhabi. He said, I'm shocked. He's been to Canada, he's been all over San Francisco, Switzerland. And he said, this is the only place where I saw so much branding of the developer. So not just the community, but the developer. So that's something for us to think about as well. Does that promote, not promote, what kind of sense of community we're creating and so on. But place branding, creating that identity, and not just through wayfinding or names. Creating that identity through urban design, through your landscape, through your architecture is really going to be increasingly important as we move into this world, this multi-sensorial, connected world. And the last I want to say that I think this is really important. Regardless of why you bought into a community, I think increasingly, especially in the next 5 to 10 years, I think we need to start thinking of our communities as what is the exit strategy. I think if you think about all of us today, let me ask a question actually. How many of you have stayed in the same house for the last 15 years? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Not too many, yeah? Because we are all mobile. We're all mobile. There's no such thing anymore. Why would I take a 30-year mortgage on a house? I don't want to live in that house for 30 years. I want to be able to move, whether it's for a job, whether for an interesting place, whether because I want to own, whether there's a new mixed-use community, whether my kids. So we're still thinking, we're still building for cities. We're building cities and communities as if people are going to stay there forever. And these poor guys that buy into some of these units, they start thinking, what's my exit strategy? For developers, you should know that one of the big drivers, whether somebody buys into a community in Dubai or not, why they make that choice between Dubai or Abu Dhabi or wherever, a big part of that is, what is my exit strategy? Can I get my money out so I can buy somewhere else? Or I can do something else? Or maybe downscale or upscale? Or that flexibility we need to start thinking about. That is really important, which I think we haven't given enough thought about. And of course, return on investment, and I just added ROE, because I think increasingly when you talk, and it's not just the urban designers and the planners, it's actually people. When you talk to people, they ask me, well, why should I move to that community? What's my return? And I always think in what they're thinking about, I'm thinking return on investment. They're thinking return on experience. What's my experience going to be? What am I going to gain? Why would I gain living there rather than just visiting? And I think we need, as developers, designers, and planners, to start thinking about that. We are all about experience, but I think combine that with the exit strategy, we start thinking a little bit different. So I'm not going to go into these questions. I was hoping that we could sort of, as a team, start to think about them, because these are questions that I'm thinking about. But I really want to say that I think we need to think about things like flexibility. These pop-up retail. Retail over the last 3 decades has been a leader in teaching us how to integrate technology, how we interact, how we create experiences. So a lot of designers will tell you that we look to retail and learn a lot from what retail has done. And then we transform that into communities. And I think one of the things that we need to learn to say is, how do I build that flexibility? Yes, you need a pop-up store in retail, but you might also need these homes that are financed differently. They're not 30-year mortgages. They don't tie somebody for life to a job because they have to pay the mortgage. We heard about the Generation Z, right? I don't know that they're all uniform because I have two of them and they're very, very different. But I think increasingly, what everybody's asking for is this customized house. And we don't do that as designers or developers. No matter, we are so careful about our landscape and our outdoor spaces and our public realm. I think we have been very successful. I think the next opportunity for us is to think about how we can truly create custom housing and residential that really matches people's family situation, whether they're age, whether they're elderly, whether they need assisted living. We don't do that yet. We create whole communities for people who are retired, and we create those communities far from everybody. We're not able to integrate them yet. So I don't want to go too much into this, except to say that there's a lot we can be thinking about. I think we can partner with the fintech community. I think they would be great partners to help us think differently about how we finance development that is more innovative. I think there's a lot of things going on. I think we can partner, and we're already doing it for some smart communities with the technology companies. I think we can partner with government. So basically, my message today is that we should celebrate how successful we've been in this region especially, but globally as urban designers, planners, developers, to really create these place-centered, people-focused communities. And I believe in that. And there are examples all over the world of this wonderful. But I think right now, I think we should have a more focused discussion on what this means, given what's happening in terms of technology, in terms of the jobs, in terms of the economy, and so on. So thank you very much for your patience. I'm taking all these questions. I wanted to share with you. I thought it might be a bit more interesting than me sharing all the projects. I don't know if anybody has any questions.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. I think you made it harder for the developers here, how they will design their projects, their compounds in the future. And I think for us as planners as well, it will be a challenge, because if we talk about existing cities and how they could adapt to the things that are taking place that you talked about, like bicycles, for example, how we can have old cities to adapt to the use of bicycles. I've been to old cities in Europe, and some of them has just took parts of the street and to be dedicated to bicycles. Some of them who don't have enough space in the street itself took part, like subdivided the sidewalks, part for bicycles and other part for the pedestrians. But it's not very, I would say, functional. So if we talk about new cities, like we have tons of new cities taking place now in Egypt that are under construction. How do planners of those cities envision, or what would be the design process for them to take things like that, where we don't have actually a real vision of what can be done in the future? Now we have some of the elements that you mentioned, but tomorrow we might have something different that we need to adapt cities to in order to make it more attractive to users or residents in the city. So what would be your suggestions for the planning process of such cities? We talk about the new cities in Egypt, for example.
So very, very good questions. I actually saw two questions in that, so I'm going to separate one thing you said that's very important, which is I made it harder for the developers. Actually, no, I'm thinking of the developers, because I'm telling you the situation right now in the region, in some of the cities, is that the competition is so fierce. It's so fierce. The developers are having to put out a lot of different types of financing to get the buyers in, because there's an oversupply. There's an oversupply in some of these cities. And so the developers having to compete with other developers for very similar products. We can all say it's unique, but at the end of the day, they're very similar products for a large extent. So the developer is now scrambling, having to put out financing, longer payment terms, give some incentives, whether it's giving cars. You know, we're doing a lot of really unprecedented things in the region to get more buyers. And I think that if you had a differentiated product, of course supply and demand matters, but I think part of it is the ability to sell some of the amenities and the products. So what I'm saying to them, to developers, is that you have this opportunity now. And I think it's not that hard. There's many examples, we can go into detail, where the differentiation has been the difference between one community being completely sold and one not. And people always ask me, why is this community doing so well and so high quality, and this one also high quality not doing well? I mean, they're very close in location. That's why I'm saying you have to be careful about location. So I think it's about saying that let's focus on additional things. Your other question is a very good question, which is that increasingly, that's why we said resilience means that you have to have focus on adaptive reuse. And I think in the Gulf region especially, but Egypt, you've already had this, we're hitting right now the first, what we call the first asset life cycle, where you start to replace buildings, you start to replace assets that were built 40, 50 years ago because given the climate, they've reached their natural life cycle. And what's happening with assets, whether they're buildings or plants or whatever, is that it's becoming faster. We have technology to make them last longer, but because of the needs, because of the demand changing, we're going to be replacing them. So I actually don't think it's difficult. In lots of the older areas in Dubai, or even in Abu Dhabi, they've been able to introduce, for example, cycles. We've done cycling master plans in these cities. In Ajman, which is a very congested city, we're going in and doing, as part of the sort of the update, there's going to be, and we've already done some parts of it, going in and trying to create, how do you create connections when the sidewalks don't connect, for example, in the streets, there's intersections. So you're right, but it's actually quite doable. And one of the things that I call for is city audits, especially in the older areas. Because people just assume we can't do it, but in fact there's lots of opportunity. There's a lot of what we call dead space that can be turned into. What we did in Abu Dhabi is take a lot of those spaces and take them and they became pocket parks. And before they were nothing. They were just lost space in between buildings or between roads. And now when you go see them, they are pocket parks. But the first thing in terms of a planning process is that you have to find them. You have to find those spaces. I don't think, again, we're taking enough time. There's so much focus on the new. There needs to be city audits of the older areas. There needs to be a review of the infrastructure. There's a lot of opportunity, and there's a lot of commitment actually by residents, by businesses. Businesses, by the way, are our partners in this because they know that they benefit when they have sidewalks and cycling in front of their businesses. They'd rather have that actually, many of them, than roads or bridges or so on. So I think there's a huge opportunity. When I was here last time in Cairo, I think I went on a tour with somebody, and I just naturally started saying, oh, we need to do this in this corner. We need to reconfigure the sidewalk here because the sidewalk was huge on a corner. You don't need that. There's a beautiful, by the way, just look it up. There's a new software. I'm a big proponent of it called Place Note. And it allows you to visually, virtually go to an area and start tagging what you see. And I didn't go too much into it, but I'm hoping that, like Swipe, I'm hoping that there will be more such software to allow people to comment and to tag on their views, because this is our future. We are going to have to deal with artificial intelligence. We're going to be doing it whether it's with robots or whether with machine learning, and I think we can do it now. I'm already looking at what we can do. Just one last comment. Developers have so much access to information through the users in their communities, through how they were financed, who's living there, the families and cities, and we're not doing anything with it. So right now, for example, there's projects in the region that's collecting all this data and trying to figure out how can we use this data. We don't know how people like their communities or not. We only know if we go do a survey. With artificial intelligence, with machine learning, with all the information that we can gather through the telephone, we now have all this data and we can actually use it to design better places where people will go, to design and to find those vacant places that are underused and so on. So I think the first thing that we do is we start focusing on some of the older areas, do a city audit. It's very easy to reconnect, whether it is through routes, through sidewalks, reconnecting some, bridges. There's so many. We've done it, for example, just to give you one example, in Abu Dhabi, we had a problem where the Corniche was cutting off a major public area. Well, one of the reasons they did was the connectivity, pedestrian connectivity underground. And that created different spaces, and then that was supplemented by sort of bridges. So there's many ways to connect and to create that. It's not always easy, definitely, in older cities. And you want to be careful what you're doing with existing infrastructure. But I also want to say it's easier than you would think if we just focus on adaptive reuse and reconnecting the different parts of the city. So, thank you.